This is the US blanks catalog. There's got to be 70 different molds in here you can pick from. And this is the same thing that Clark foam had for years. You know, the thing with this kind of foam is you pick as close as possible to what you end up with, because the more you shape off the foam, the softer it gets. So you want a hard surface for the glass to sit on. The only way to do that is to pick the blank close. Like this one. The 81EA, we're going to make a board from it. And when they put the stringer in, they cut the blank in half and glue it back together to give it rigidity, but they can also bend it the way you want, have it bent, different rockers it's called. So that's the key right there. You know, you get the rocker glued in it to get the board to perform what it's intended to do. You just don't take a guess at and let them ship anything. You know, you have to, you know, this can be bent without a stringer very easily. So it also could be very floppy without a stringer. So you say, I want XYZ rocker glued in the 81EA, and that's what I want, and a different size wood in the middle. So this is your basic thing. So what we're going to do is make something very close to shape out of this blank from hand. And I'll just go through the process so you can see it. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be noisy. Is that mascot here? Got a planer hooked up to a dust collector on a switch. When you turn this on, it starts it automatically. So. In shaping terminology, this is called taking a pass off the blank. The reason you have to do that is the resin won't enter the pores through the skin. You got to let the resin enter into the pores to grab hold of the cells, or it won't stick to it. So you got to get through the skin of the blank. So the blanks are designed slightly over thickness, so you accommodate that. My hand is always on the depth adjuster right here. Just, you know, making up for different parts of the blank that may be high or low. I can feel it. And you don't want to go too deep or too light. It's got to be just right. So that's what I was talking about before. They made this adjust just like the skill did. Line on the board, the actual shape, just that way. So I'm going to show you one way that we do it. called a template. Lots of people use templates for different things. As you see, there's tons of templates. There's not room for all, so there's some on the floor. We got them everywhere. So the more templates you have, the easier it is to make the board.
On your collection that you have, like,
Yeah.
built over the last
Yeah, you can't buy them. You got to make your own. So.
30 years.
Yeah. So I recently moved here from another place where we had more room, and there were templates everywhere. A bunch of them are outside because there's just not room for them. So you basically, when you find a really nice board you shape, you trace it on a piece of masonite and cut it out with a bandsaw and true it up. So. There are lots of different ways of outlining a board. This is just one of them. I had in the 80s when we were doing lots of sailboards, I had this flush cut router bit custom made because sailboards are so thick. It's way too thick for surfboards and it's really dangerous, but I still use it. So the thing is, this little ball bearing at the top will follow this template and make a perfect cut if you know what you're doing. So. Griffin made a little milder version of it for himself, and it's probably a lot more safer. So I'm going to cut this side and then the other, and you'll probably get a better shot over here, but I'll come back with this one, okay? Now, because no matter how good you are, to get one side of this exactly like the other is nearly impossible, so we just flip it. And the reason we use a whole piece is always to clamp on from the other side. So we're not using it like it is. We flip it and get this curve on that side so it's exactly the same. You could spend all day trying to get the other side perfect, but why not just flip it? And then it's symmetrical. People have asked me, why don't you just make full templates and you don't have to flip it? I go, well, you know, they're not going to be exactly the same. I actually got this router idea from surfer ads in the 60s when they were making so many boards. The people from Redondo area like that were doing this method. What you can do if you want to is put two completely different shapes on each side, right, as long as they're the same length, you know, and one narrow one thick one, and then you save time and money and material and everything. So here we go. You know, this is going to fit in there. I have to hand pull it into the template, just carefully. You don't want to do this if you don't know what you're doing. And because a round router bit won't fit into the V,
Yeah.
we leave it and cut it out with a jigsaw. Now you can see you got a real nice curve on it. It's symmetrical. Once you get the right blank with the right rocker and a nice curve on the outline, you're pretty much set. The worst thing you can do is pick the wrong blank with the wrong rocker, have to shape new curves into it, and spend all day doing that. And you're wasting your time, and also by shaping too much off of the foam, it gets soft. Put too much glass on a soft foam, and the glass will dent down and pop off the foam, and you get a D-land. So it's kind of tricky. You can see the deck already has some roll in it, so you're not shaping from a square like we just shaped that styrofoam board from a block. So that type of foam, it doesn't matter how much you take off, the hardness always stays the same. This is different. Because I'm not going to take much off, you use the skill planer with the grit. It doesn't take much, but it doesn't tear it either. Once again, the hands on this adjustment all the time, so you can turn it and adjust the depth. Because of the shear, the planer doesn't let you get into these extreme curves. You got to use whatever you can. This is called a shear form. So the whole bottom right now is very close to being perfectly flat this way. I'm going to change it so it goes back into a V back here like a powerboat hull. So it actually lifts the rail up and makes it easier to turn. I'm going to go back with a real fine planer and smooth it all out to make it easier to sand when we sand it, rather than leave all these ridges in it. You can see the difference.
Bruce, can you just slow down? We want to get off for a second. Or just do it like a little, just
A little bit?
Yeah.
Now, one thing we're going to do is we're counting on this bottom being, shaped on the same plane. Like there's no twist here, there's no twist like that compared to the center. Same thing in the back. So Griffin and I are going to put on some quick, simple tools to look for that. Turn on the top light so that these just have to be at right angles to the stringer. So checking for the right angles here, like that. Same thing with this. Okay.
Got it.
Okay.
Did you get that as a close-up, Rick? Do you need the template one more time? There we go.
Yeah, we're just making sure that our little bars here at right angles through the stringer, or this whole thing won't work.
Okay.
Okay. Then, see the.
Like a bit level?
Yeah. You know, when a surveyor they use a baseline that they survey everything from. We're going to use this area right here because it's the widest, flattest part of the board as our baseline. No matter what the level says, I don't care if it's level or not, it's just touching that hair over there. And we could make it level by shifting it, the roll of the deck, but so it's just touching that one. And it's not quite touching that one, so what we have to do is, I'm going to shape a little off this other side. This gets pretty tricky. Let's get the square back on it. So this side has to go down. So it's high. Just put an H here. And it's high by, until that level hits the same mark over there, about 1/8 of an inch. So we know it's high here. Before we start doing anything to shape the rails, we got to get this right or it's going to come out twisted. Okay, this one's fine. It's just touching the line. So. It's really easy to twist a board, and most people won't go through this. But if you just take 5 minutes or so to do this, then everything, when you turn the rails down to the bottom, everything ends up true. So you don't get a board that the tail's like this and then the nose is like that. So most shapers blame it on the fiberglassers, but that's not the case. So.
Oh.
So now I'm going to remove some foam over on this side
Okay.
to get it even. And I'm going to turn this around so you don't get all the foam shooting in your camera. Okay? I don't think you'd appreciate
that, yeah.
I think you'd appreciate it. I'll get some more in my face, but. Now most shapers just do it by eye, but can you see 1/8 of an inch, you know, and this way or that way? I doubt it, so you really have to measure it. And it only takes a few minutes. And once you get that done, you have a plane of reference to shape the rest of the board. And I'm sure, you know, most shapers aren't concerned with this, but I am. So then, because you know this is your plane of reference and both ends are true, I know where the center of the rail is going to be on the board and how far it's going to go in this way, so I can mark them. I'll come back over on that side so you can see it too. Just put some dots. I'm going to come back over there. You can see it a lot better when I do. Okay, get on this side. I'm just trying to get you the best shot. So here we can see that the board's very flat. We've got right angles. I know how far the rail's going to come in, and I know how far it's going to come down. And the reason I know that because I've done this 1,000 times. I also do a quick nose measurement to make sure I get them in the right place. Hope you can see okay. I'll just pretend I'm over here, okay? Now what we're going to do next is we're going to start giving the rails some shape. You know, you don't want to produce a board given to the customer like this. It's not efficient for the water and doesn't turn well. So now we're going to make the rails curve. Okay, this blank was designed for US blanks by a very good Hawaiian shaper about 4 years ago, and it's a really nice blank. But boards are getting wider and thicker all the time, and so we're going to stretch this to its maximum capacity. But by doing that, we'll stay on the skin, and it'll really be strong. So what we're doing is taking our own catalog here, and we're reproducing what is aptly named the Fatty, because we're making a short board for a big guy, and he wants to float. So anyway, so that's we're just, you can see the shape is very similar, if not the same. That's what we're going to end up with. This is a cross section of the rail. That's how I know where to mark them. So far in, so far up. Now, in shaper terms, this is called banding a rail. It was first explained to me at Hobie's, if you had a long stick of wood, and how would you make a sailboat mast out of it, you know? You'd have to stop cutting off the corners, you know, correctly, nice and evenly, and do it the same on all 4 sides of the stick. So it's basically what you're doing. So basically, I end up with 3 different angles here. And we'll get the rest of it down with the most appropriate tool. A bigger tool does the rough work, a finer tool does the fine work. So you can't go too far with a big tool, or you can't try to do this with a fine tool, or you get bumps in it. You know, the planer has a great ability to take out bumps as it shapes along. In fact, if you have your outlines curving like this, and you do these bands right, they'll show up like night and day on the outline. So. So what you can see is I've shaped to my marks. If I didn't have those marks there and knew everything was true, I'd be lost in midair. You know, you have to mark the blank to know where to go, or you just can't let it go anywhere. So same thing on the deck. I'm going to continue the curve down, and because this blank is so close to shape and almost over curved, I have to be really careful not to take too much off to get the right result out of it. If I do it right, then you end up with the ultimate, you know, strong surface to put the glass on. Now, this is a good example of what a planer can do. These little wiggly things you see here in the lines, it's all already showing up that the outline wasn't perfect. The template isn't perfect in every spot. So as you go around with this, it starts to take those out, And they show up like a sore thumb, and you can just get them at the last minute. You can knock them right out of the board. That's why you don't want to use shape the board with the hand tool, because it doesn't have enough power and length to smooth out surfaces. I don't know if that makes sense, but. So there you go. I mean, I use the fine planer because we're not going to take much off. I don't want to tear the foam. Not much came off, but you got a nice full rail by being real careful with it. That's going to retain some of the buoyancy of the board rather than taper it way down. We got some tiny little things showing up here. It's not that I've taken too much off here, it's that the outline's sticking out here a little bit. So you can just flip it right off. By using the planer, it makes all these little things show up, and you just get them out right away. You can imagine trying to shape this with a block plane. You know, hours and hours of this, and you're bound to get dips and high spots and everything else. So, you know, you want to start with a big tool and finish with a fine one. This kind of work is not for somebody at faint at heart that doesn't like to get dust on them, obviously. So it's usually why I wear a white t-shirt when I'm shaping, because it doesn't show and it doesn't absorb the heat from the lights. So, but you wanted me to wear a blue shirt. So.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Now, are you normally wearing a mask?
Yeah, I am. Just doing it so I can talk better and sit here. So now we're going to go on here, but when Griffin first approached me as a new shaper, he left this so blocky it was ugly, and he didn't know how to do it. And I go, don't shape another board until I show you the trick to doing this. And those of us that learned in the 70s to shape all these swallowtails had to figure this out. So it's very simple. Trick is to make a valley so the shear form stays in the valley. Tends to slide off the hard surface and shape the soft surface. So you got to make a valley and just shape it the way you want. I'll turn on the side light so you can see this better. Then you just start. I'll use the other lights, it's better. You start matching the shape of this tail to the valley you made. So you turn it into a much more aesthetically pleasing look. That kind of starts taking on the shape of a fish's tail, and that's why this is called a fish. Then you can get down inside the valley even a little further with some files. You can usually tell who's been trained and who hasn't by the way they do this tail. I mean, some shapers leave it so blocky because they haven't figured this out, and they even produce it as a molded board because they don't know anything about this, making it look like a fish. Real nice. So, you know, we dropped the big tools and started working with fine tools. Get all the curves coming up right. So then we just continue our banding with different tools. Like this is a Stanley shear form. They don't make them anymore this long. They don't make the blades for them anymore, so you got to be really careful with this tool not to break anything. So it's just like the planer being a long tool, this is a long tool also. follow just a few simple things when you're shaping, you don't have to continuously look for high spots and low spots. They just come out. I mean, if you don't follow some of those rules with the planer and the template and all that, then you're always looking, having to fix little areas of the board that are either low or they're high. So but by following a pattern, you can do it quickly, and you don't end up with a lot of bumps in it that you spend a lot of time taking out. One of the tricks is to take long, even strokes. Rather than sit here and just kind of shape like that, that's going to dig a hole in it. So. Now this is one of the reasons why if I was at Sacred Craft shaping in those booths without top lights, I wouldn't know what to do. I mean, because I can't see the shadows I want to see around this edge. So. Another thing, see how we blacked out the bottom lights and only use the top ones? And you hardly even see the top ones because they're covered by the shades. If you have to look at those bright lights all day long, you know, it really strains your eyes. So we're taking basically plastic tubes, painted them black, and covered the bottom lights so we don't have to actually look at them the whole day. So. So now if you want to, you could use the same tool that we were using earlier. You press it on the rail. And you can see that this one's a little bit thicker and you got to take a little more off. So. So basically, we're about an hour into this blank, I think. I'm not sure, but we're getting really close. If you know what you're doing and take the right steps, it doesn't take that long. I mean, you can order the blanks from a machine guy, have them delivered, but that whole process takes a while. And I mean, sometimes you might as well just sit here and do it rather than wait for all that. So I'll show you one of those in a minute. The wood always stays high because it's harder than the foam. So you got to keep working it down or you end up with a bump there. If you don't, when they glass the board and the glass goes over the bump and then they sand the board, it sands the fiberglass right off that bump and the board is weakened right in the center. So Now, foam, when it's done correctly, is very uniform in hardness. Wood isn't. It's nature's wood. So you might run across a hard spot and a soft spot, and you have to be careful not to dig out the soft spots. So it's a little more touchy than foam. And shaping from balsa boards in the old days was a lot harder than this, because wood naturally has hard and soft areas. So, I was on a piece of 40 grit, now I'm on a piece of 50 grit. You can just feel the wood hitting the sandpaper, and you can get this right where you want it, and so you end up with two flat surfaces on an angle. It's called the V. Funny, the V shape has been around for a long time, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. There's a lot of fancy bottoms nowadays, but the fancy stuff comes and goes with time, but this kind of bottom stays no matter what. So that's kind of how I like to design the boards around the long-run traditional shapes rather than something fancy that is going to fade away soon. Always get all the grit out from underneath the block, because if it makes a hard surface and you got the screen of the sandpaper under it, you'll get a gouge. I asked the famous shaper Dale Velzy, 30 years ago, which tool would be the most important of all that you shape a surfboard with. He said the sanding block. And it really makes a difference to have a really hard, flat, heavy block that's totally flat, but it's heavy, so it carries some momentum, and it's knocking out the highs and skipping the low spots of the board. I can just feel and hear the wood starting to stick up, so that's when you stop, plane it again, and go to a finer screen. I'm showing you the traditional way of doing it. A lot of shapers have a piece of sandpaper on a soft pad, and they'll just wipe it clean, but it still has bumps. So now I'm going to switch to even a finer screen, which is basically a doily that's been so well used over the years that it's like almost like a doily, but it really shaped. Glassers are always asking me for a piece of used screen because they get boards to glass in all kinds of different conditions on the surface, and they have to clean them up. So they're always looking for a piece of used fine screen to clean them up. So the idea that I do, and I'm trying to show Griffin, is that you want to give the glasser a perfect, smooth surface, and you know the reputation gets around that. Oh my God, you know, you want to see how it's really done? The glasser will tell people that. See, there's an example of a little bit of something got caught underneath the screen. See that line? Maybe you can barely see it, but I see it. So you got to clean out your screen. So like, you know, the theory of speedboats and planing hulls, you want a flat bottom. If you have any V-net, they have to be flat too, because the rounder it is, the slower they go. So you want to make sure that, at least to me, that's almost perfectly flat, and each V panel is very close to flat. No roll in it. Yeah.
You get a vine shot off it.
I could probably get a better tool than that because that's so transparent. Thank you. You know, you want to make sure that the bottom is either flat or very close to flat. If you have a round surface and the thing's rolling with it like that, it's going to be slow. These things are planing hulls. They're like throwing a pebble on the water. You know, they skip. And the flatter they are, the faster they'll go. Now with careful use of the screen, you can actually roll the rest of these lines right out of the rail. When I go back to the other side, I'll give you a better example. Get like, see all these little angles?
Yep.
Now the rail of a surfboard gets progressively harder and harder and harder as the tail, so the water will flow off nice and smooth. You don't want it wrapping around the rail too much. You can't carry it up too far. The board's going to skip during a turn. So this rail shape has just evolved over the years from the end of the longboard period till now to be almost every modern surfboard has this kind of shape. Some are thinner, some are thicker, bulked up, thinned down, but it's the same shape. It's like if you've ever been on an airplane like a Cessna, one single engine airplane, if you put your hand on the front of the wing, it feels like a huge surfboard rail, same kind of shape. So there's some kind of analogy there, even though it's air and water. So. So like we were talking about the last time, evolution of a surfboard, like natural evolution. Well, since the end of the 60s, people have tried every kind of rail shape you can imagine. And over the last 40 years, 49 years, this shape has evolved with everyone to be the best shape. You don't see too many variations. The only thing you see is is thicker ones, thinner ones, but they're all about the same shape. So that just shows you that nobody tested it to find out. You just throw it out in the environment, and whatever works is incorporated by everyone, just like nature. So all of a sudden, if nature comes along and puts a little bump here, like I'll show you in a second, on an animal, it just happens because your genes, your genes change through radiation, and it gets put out in the water, so to speak. And does it do any good or not? And does it help or hinder? You never know. Eventually, that bump will go away because it doesn't do any good. It's no use even having it. And we'll show you an example of that in a minute. And in surfboard design, we're not dealing with genetics, but we're dealing with fashion. So sometimes fashion says you have to do a swallowtail, and then you have to do it or you won't sell boards. That's kind of the genetic thing that nature does, and all of a sudden people figure out it's not doing any good, and it goes away. So this tail shape has come and gone, 5 or 6 times in the last 49 years. So. Personally, I'd rather do a nice normal square tail or a rounded pintail, but fashion dictates sometimes what we have to do. This blank was so close to shape that I got some skin left from the original blank surface, and I got to get it off. One reason is because it doesn't sand like the rest of the board. The glass won't stick to it. Some more right there. The Sacred Craft show was a really good example of fashion dictating different shapes. They're going so far off on the left. Well, right would be conservative. They're going so far conservative that it's getting strange, and the stuff doesn't even work. So, just for fashion. missing a foam pad. I'll just use this one. There it is. Is Terry Martin on your list of shapers?
Not yet, but
He should be the one, if anybody, that you should. So this is that flexible sanding tool again that starts to take the shape of the deck, hits the highs and leaves the lows.
as you started, and what of those tools you sort of have adjusted yourself over the
Yeah.
years?
Well, the skill planer was the ultimate first tool, and everybody had them when I started. And I started at Hobie's working in the gluing side of it, gluing blanks together, which I did at Clark Foam, and then eventually worked my way into the shaping room. And the skill planer was the thing to have because it was so easy to adjust in the front. So, and then these are pretty much standard tools. A low angle Stanley block plane. You want the top light on, or see it better? It's just a standard low angle Stanley block plane. You have to keep the blade really sharp and round the corners off so it doesn't gouge the foam. So if you have a high angle block plane, it won't work at all. It's got to be low. So, but that's nothing new. This is Stanley spoke shave, basically to get in the curves where the block plane won't fit because it's too flat and long. So to get up there in the nose on a high rockered board, you have to dig in with this. So it's got to be extremely sharp too, with the corners rounded off. So, as I explained to Griffin, what happened over time, the grinding stone I use has become concave from so much use that it grinds off the corners all by itself. You know, I mean, it makes it slightly round. So because the stringer isn't this wide, it's only this wide, you don't need this much tool.
Right.
So all you need is the center part. The trouble is you can't find anything smaller than this that'll really do the job. So you just learn to adjust it and adapt it to what you need to do. So, but the trick is, again, to keep them really sharp. This is a Stanley Sureform from probably the 60s and 70s. The only ones they make now are this long, and there's something about the blades that came with these that make it really easy to shape foam, and they stopped making both the tool and the blades. So it's really good. Yeah. Yeah. This is the stone. Let me get up the straight edge. We roll the blades on it with a little roller, and you can see over the years it's gone concave. It didn't come that way.
Right.
So it puts a roll on the blade, which is perfect for what we want to do. Just sheer coincidence, you know. So, and you flip it over to the fine side, it's got pretty much the same curve in it. But what else could I show you? The dust.
Is that something that you like to keep, like, I don't want to say secret, but how much of those tools are shared or?
Oh, they're all shared. It's just that some of the younger shapers don't know about the traditional tools. They're trying to use tools that don't work. They use a tiny little spoke shave that's only this long. It's made for model making, and they're trying to get in and make it. It's just impossible, you know. just to work. The dust collector used to be a Clark foam dust collector, this machine. It's not OSHA approved, and they got rid of it and they gave it to me. I adapted it to fit the drum, got a bag for it, and made it work. I built this in like 1986 or something. So, and then Clark, started building their own and selling them to shapers because of the health issues of dust. And the trouble with most dust collectors are really noisy. I mean, they just howl like a shop vac, and just too noisy. This is really quiet and does its job really well. That thing fills up the bucket and the bag so quickly you wouldn't believe it. Even though there's a lot on the floor, it really fills it up fast. So all that would be on the floor in our lungs and the air if we didn't have some kind of dust collector. So, as you saw at Sacred Craft, most people, those booths had a dust collector in them, I think. I didn't get a chance to look. So again, we're just going to finer and finer. Actually, I have a little divot here I'm going to have to work out, or that's going to be a problem with the final product. See this little gouge? This is from the planer. So what I'm doing is extending the curve a little here so I can work that. To the customer, a board that's presented to them very well done, they're likely to do a better job. If they get something that's all hacked up, well, they're just going to hack it up too. So, like I said before, if you have high spots and the glass sits on the high and the sander doesn't see them, the glass is going to get buzzed right off the top of the high spots, and then the board's ruined. So. Now, because you guys are showing me and watching me talk to me, it's going to take probably 2 hours. In real time, just all by myself, it would take me an hour, 45 minutes. And the guy, Terry Martin, I told you, who was at Hobie's when I originally started, half an hour. So then you can take one of your final steps is to actually take the screen and start wrapping it around the rail and taking those little divots out, rather than sit there with a block and trying to get every one out like that. There was a pretty famous surfboard shaper in Huntington Beach in the 60s, Gordon Dwayne, Gordy Surfboards, Gordy. He's the guy that taught me this. He looked at me doing this one day. He goes, "Stop. I'm going to show you a trick." So So what Gordy did, he made me put a point on the edge of the rail, a perfect point. So when he looked at it, he could see where the point was waffling in the light. And then we had to fix that and then round it off until we got it wired, you know. So he wasn't messing around. He was one of the few people that actually stopped and said, "You're doing it wrong. This is the way you have to do it. And let me see every board you shape till I tell you they're okay." So. So we're pretty close. In the 60s, in the early 60s to mid 60s, there was no such thing as side lights. All one line at the top. In fact, if you look at those pictures in the ads, especially an old Hobie ad from the early 60s, there's 6 shapers shaping in the same room without walls, the light going over each one. And somehow they managed to get them pretty good with all this light flooding from all different angles.
So when did they start doing the side light here?
I don't remember exactly, but all I remember is when I moved from Dana Point area up to Huntington because I was going to Long Beach State, a guy said, "You can shape for me, but you got to build your own room." And I thought to myself, well, why not put the lights on the side? You know, and it worked. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but I did it and it worked. In fact, you know, almost every room I built by myself, except this one. Where's our little tool here? Now, most shapers think you have to shape a perfect edge here to get a perfect edge when the board's done. But in fact, the glass won't wrap around a perfect edge. So the glasses are going to round it off anyway. So I mentioned this to Griffin that, you know, if you don't do it for them, they're going to do it for you. And then they'll have to think about it every time they get one of your boards. Why didn't this guy round off the edge? He knows you have to round off the edge. So if you don't round it off and you try to wrap the fiberglass around it, you get a bubble there. And then it ruins the strength of the whole thing. So. Right, Griffin?
Yeah.
This is why I like having a top light, because you can see all these things on the edge. It's showing shadows this way rather than flooding it with side lights and you can't see a darn thing. So if you get a bubble in the rail and the laminator doesn't fix it, and it goes onto the hot coater and the sander, etc., it's going to be buzzed off in each step, and there'll be actually a place that doesn't have fiberglass. And the customer will get it in a matter of a couple weeks. It's going to start splitting at that. So you've got to be careful of that. When the sander sands it, he's got to make sure that when he sands around, sands the fiberglass step to the board, when he sands around these curves, that he doesn't buzz the fiberglass off. Because if it is, the customer will get it within 2 weeks. It'll just be coming unglued like this. So it's very touchy, very touchy. So here I am with my doily again. You wrap it around twice around your thumb and finger, you can just start fine shaping. Got to get this caught. Use the template, the fatty template. Went through all those steps, and we end up nice, smooth, and a good design. The design has to be good, it has to be smooth, it has to be symmetrical across the stringer. You can't have one side thicker than the other, or the twist that I was talking about. So. Now this is an example of a thing that was in fashion in the early 70s, and now it's back in fashion. It went out of fashion because it didn't work. But now everybody has to have one again just because of retro. So we'll see how long this lasts. But do you think that's going to help or harm a surfboard or a fish? I don't know. Now, this is a blank that's been computer pre-shaped. What you do is you give the computer guys a finished board, and they read one half of it, only one half, and it mirrors when they set the program up, it mirrors the other half, so you get a perfectly symmetrical, non-twisted product, which is really good. I believe it came around in the early 90s when there was so much demand for surfboards that there weren't enough shapers to shape them, so they had to think of some way to make it easier. So, and they could hire people that weren't as professional to finish these off. It doesn't take long to finish one of these off. But for instance, this blank is left over from the bubble of 2004, 2005 when it was really busy. And now it's not so busy. So rather than spend the money to have this done, we're just doing them by hand the old way. So.
Looks like just an idea. What's the price difference between, like, for you for the pre-shaped blank versus the?
This will cost you an extra 40 to 45 for a short board to 70 or 80 for a long board to get this done to a blank. So there's certain times in the economic cycle that it pays off, and sometimes it doesn't. So right now I'm sitting on a few of these still, slowly using them up, and then we'll have to wait and see what happens during the next upturn, which will come eventually. So what's going to happen, I'm not sure. But the one thing that they did was make it easier, make it more true, and a lot less work for the shapers. So anyway, we don't do this much anymore. I'm just waiting to see what happens with the economy. You can see the cutter head goes up and down the board, and it's all computerized and cuts down every time. These are cutter grooves. You just sand down to the bottom of the groove, and there you go. Or you can change it if you want. Make it thinner. You can't make it thicker, but thinner. So.